questions, and then we're going to wrap up the program. Nicole, right here.
Hi, Nicole Daly-Jones from North Olmsted. My question is, when you talk about the potential tax revenue sharing among this region, what will your group do to educate each municipality about how to actually implement that? And are you going to be meeting with like our finance directors or our city's administrations? And finally, will the municipalities have to purchase new software or anything like that to actually have this come to fruition? Thanks.
Okay. Good, very, very good question. Did everybody hear that? Okay. The question from Nicole was that what is the RPI steering committee and this initiative going to do to educate once we begin implementation? The local community's finance directors, is there new software that's going to be necessary for each community, and what does that mean, and who's going to pay for that? And how are we going to go out? Once we have our proposed plan, which is due in the first quarter of next year, we will be going out with those details in a massive effort, every community, every interested party, not only presenting it, but listening to the feedback. Because, you know, when you plan something as, and this is complex, there is no doubt about it, but we're going to try to make it as straightforward as possible. There will be an idea that comes up that maybe we haven't embraced and we need to. So we're going to stay flexible. Or we may get some pushback and say, you know what, we can't do that right now. We need to crawl a little bit more, but let's implement this. We're going to be flexible in that. And then we're also going to raise the funds necessary, because there's a huge buy-in from the state and even from the federal government to provide supporting funds for any costs that might take place. It's really not going to be that difficult because we're talking about tax base. We're already determining that at the county level, okay, as opposed to tax revenues. There's tax base and then how we equate it from there. So we'll only need, there are systems already in place for us to do that, okay? Yes.
And I would just add that, you know, RETA is already doing this, Regional Income Tax Authority, and based on the formula that is being proposed by RPI, it's just a formula that you would plug into a computer. And I don't know, Carrie, maybe you can explain and talk a little bit about the funding mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, the funding mechanism to build, it really is. It is a formula that goes into a computer. It's an algorithm. It's not manipulatable. It's not something that every 2 years or 4 years the political process has to come involved. It is simply a formula based on tax base. And that's the tax capacity question you're asking. It's not the tax level of revenues that you get from the tax base. It's simply the value of the land and the building and what's in it. So that really is probably the simplest way to boil it down. And you factor that in and say, all right, in this community they have this much tax capacity. How's that for the average of all the communities around here? And how much growth did they see? Some have seen none and don't want to. You got to Wayne County, they don't want to become Medina County. They like their rural nature and don't want to grow. Other areas have grown significantly, some of our second-ring suburbs, as you all know. And now it's moving out even further. So then you factor that and say this much goes into the pool. This community is actually going to get this much back, which could even be more than what they put in if they had no growth. If you have zero growth, you contribute nothing, but you're still a recipient. That's where the term everybody wins here. Everybody gets something from the pool, but not everybody contributes. So some of the real high growth areas, like the Bloomington up in Minneapolis, is a continual donor, but they're growing 10% a year. They don't have any problems. So I think that's the important part, and I know there's a lot more specifics with the algorithm, but that really is, it is not something that cities are going to have to mess with. It's not something that you're going to have to factor. It's collected data already. As we said before, we already have the information. It's just how it's being used.
We'll take two more questions, but I want to recognize the leadership of RPI for a minute. The three cities or mayors all come from fairly affluent cities. You have the mayor of Hudson, you have the mayor of Richfield, and the mayor of Pepper Pike, all fairly affluent cities who realize that what's happening in the cities in the urban areas and the inner ring suburbs could very well affect the communities they represent. And if we don't make the entire region whole, you know what happens to cancer when it strikes somewhere. We'll take a couple more questions. Mark?
Mark Gray, Orange Village. First of all, to jump on what you just said, without a strong central core, the rest of us, you know, are certainly a very weakened position. We need to strengthen the entire region for all of us to benefit. There's continuous reference to the St. Paul, Minneapolis area and the strengths that they've achieved over the years. What has Columbus done over the years? I keep reading about how much success they've had in developing their region, and is their approach different from this, or is it similar?
Annexation.
Yeah, and you know that's a very good question, because the Columbus area has grown, but it has grown by annexation, and they utilize their water early on as a tool for tax for revenue sharing. But an example of that is that here, Cleveland, Ohio, has about 72 square miles. Now, correct me, Matt? 77 square miles. I was close. 77 square miles. The city of Columbus is now 265 square miles. They are over 1 million people, but they are, and Cleveland is about, my numbers say between 425 and 450 as far as census is concerned for Cleveland. But the population of Cleveland, it's denser. So what they have done is they have just annexed their sprawl. And I can tell you that the city of Columbus, Ohio, while still holding on to their AAA bond rating, is in serious situation, because now they have growth leaping outside of Columbus, and you can just go down to Polaris and see that, and see the exponential growth that's taking place. It's now going outside the boundaries of Columbus, and there virtually is no universal plan. It really isn't. So, and that's expensive.
One last question.
And I'm not faulting Columbus at all. That's the way that they have grown, but they also have a university down there that has about 45,000 students, and there's something about a state capital that creates jobs. I don't know what that's all about, but thank you for Orange Village. Orange has been very supportive of this right along.
Ed Bonk, Orange Village. How much tax revenue's been lost via abatement between, let's call it, as you said, down the highway? You know, relocation of companies between 25 miles, you know, a half an hour. Does anybody calculate how much tax revenue's been extracted?
You know, it's scary, actually. That's a very, very good point. I don't have a number, and I am almost afraid to calculate it. But all I know is that one of the examples that we use, and it's very relevant because it happened a couple of years ago. UPS terminal in Middleburg Heights. Does anybody know the story, what happened? I mean, maybe some of you do. In Middleburg Heights, they weren't going to leave the region. They were going to they needed a new terminal and needed to do some things. And the number of tools that Middleburg Heights had were very limited to retain a company. They moved to Strongsville. It's less than 5 miles away to where they moved, by the way the crow flies. They had 10 years of abatement on their property, 10 years abatement on their income tax. They had investment, new growth, employee contribution, and they moved, and one city lost even more because of that, because they have to wait for the whole 10 years. And the only part of that was that anybody gained was UPS headquarters in Atlanta. Shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. They weren't going to Toledo, they weren't going to Columbus, they weren't going to Kentucky. They still had to be here. But those tools have to be used better. And if we had this system in place, that wouldn't have happened. It really wouldn't have.
Well,
good point.
All of you, please join me and let's welcome Mayor Kern. Thank Mayor Kern and Terry Smith.